Hello and welcome to the Business of Story. I'm your host, Park Howell, and I am so proud to welcome Sendable as our sponsor. Sendable is the social media management platform that I personally prefer to handle all of our storytelling online. Sendable has generously offered you, an ardent Business of Story listener, an incredible 30% discount on their traction plan. It's normally $99 a month, but if you use my link, you can get it for just $69 a month. So visit sendable.com/park30 to start your free 30-day trial today.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture, I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands, people buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
Have you ever been caught flat-footed in a media interview? I remember when I was being interviewed at Paramount Studios in Hollywood for a documentary on business storytelling, and I went in pretty confident. Figured I knew my stuff, but as the lights went up and the questions came out, I rambled on like a third grader all hopped up on starbursts. My brain frantically searched for just the right insightful content, the correct comment, the perfect little quip to share. But you know what I did? I went blah, 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 story, blah, 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 storytelling, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know where this is going. I basically sucked. But interestingly enough, I did make the film with one tiny little thing that I said that apparently actually made sense. But I blew it that day because I had never had the media training we can all use, and I was overconfident and way underprepared. Well, you and I are in luck today because we have a guy who coaches CEOs, politicians, athletes, and speakers from around the world on how to interview like a boss. Steve Kosch, formerly an on-air personality with the Weather Channel and CNN, is founder of Media Training Network. He's here to help us make the most of our interview opportunities in print, radio, and TV. You get to learn at my expense as Steve puts me through the interview paces. So no matter if you're trying to own the presentation stage or shine in your 15 minutes of fame in mass media, this show's for you. Right now, with legendary presentation and media coach Steve Kosch on the Business of Story. Steve, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, Park. I'm excited.
I am delighted to have you here because I know, for one, you are going to help me today figure out how I can do better with my soundbite storytelling. But we'll get to that because I know that's powerful stuff. You have been in the broadcast business for a long, long time, starting out as a 15-year-old weatherman. How'd that happen?
I had a passion for weather. At home, I don't know where I got this. I just enjoyed watching the clouds and the wind and the sun. And I took readings in my backyard every morning and every night, the high and low temperature.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Monrovia, California, which is in the Los Angeles area.
Okay.
So growing up in that's where I was. That's where I observed the weather. Although it's not that dramatic as it would be maybe in Kansas City, Missouri, or somewhere like that where they really have some weather. But it was weather for me, and I loved it, and that got my appetite for that. But I love to report it. I would, do the readings every morning and every night. Take a
Who are you
log
reporting
book.
to? I mean, to your family?
No, I would, maybe it's not reporting. Maybe that came about 6 months later. But what I was doing was just writing in a notebook just for myself, just so I can see how the high it was and how low it was and what the winds were like and all that sort of thing.
Okay, so I got to stop you there because I got to believe there's an insight here. What do you think it was about that had you so intrigued as a young man?
I don't know. I really don't. There's no story there except for I just had a passion for it and I loved it. I had a little movie film camera that I would do stop laps and then I'd play that back and I'd see the clouds blossoming. Some reason it just resonated with me. And then all things weather, that led to watching television weathercasters in Los Angeles. So they were modeling what perhaps I would want to do later on. But that opportunity actually came within 6 months when my parents were down in Oceanside, California, and they had a summer home there. And they were just breaking ground for a new cable television station called Cablevision back in 1970. So I was just this pimple faced 15-year-old kid that just loved weather. And they had a weather station there and they had a weather reporter. So I went and volunteered to write on the chalkboard all the details for the main weather person. And then I eventually got to go on camera. So I did that every school break I could, winter break, spring break, you name it, I was there. So I had this great opportunity. And keep in mind that I had watched all these Los Angeles weathercasters and continued to do so. So I was taking notes of how they talked about the weather. So for me, it was just the passion that led to this career in television where I ended up eventually with ABC in New York and also in Los Angeles, and then also CNN, where I closed out my career and then started my own business here in California, moving back from New York.
Well, that's the thing then. So you must have been comfortable in front of the camera and did a good job in front of it to move from a 15-year-old pimple-faced weather reporter up to
Right.
CNN.
Yeah, I guess so. It was just I think it was the modeling along with everything else, and I didn't even know it was called modeling. I was just watching people talk about the weather that I like talking about, and one thing led to another, and I had that presence about me. I guess when I first started, I don't even think they had videotape back then. I'm sure they did, but I don't even want to look at that. But it was fun. It was a great experience. And I think where I'm at right now with Media Training Network, it gives me the opportunity to use all my past experiences in presenting and not just getting somebody in front of a camera or talking on a podcast or a radio, but it also is what I'm teaching is the executive presence. And again, I modeled that from all these people that I used to work with over the years. People like Walter Cronkite and Larry King and Regis Philbin and Tom Snyder and Zig Ziglar and on, all these people that were at the top of their game. I saw how they presented themselves, and that obviously rubbed off on me.
What do you think they had in common? All those big names and those iconic faces on camera. And looking back, you can feel like there was a thread that they all had that certain same thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, in addition to their presentation skills, how smooth they were, how interesting they were interested in people. I think that's the bottom line. They wanted to hear their perspective on the news or sports or entertainment, whatever it might be. They just had that passion to tell me your story. What's the story? What's the line here that we can go with? And it was just an interest in people. And it resonated with me, all these people, because those were my heroes. They were my mentors. That's what I looked up to, and that's how I followed them.
So what was your first big break then coming out of your first job as a weatherman?
Well, it wasn't my first break, but it was my third break. We'll call it that way. And once I left 15, 16 years old, went through high school, I did graduate and then college. And then I went up to NBC in Bakersfield, California. But I still had the opportunity to watch Los Angeles television market through cable. And I saw, of course, I stayed in touch with these people and looked at their presentations, and I saw somebody that just didn't fit anymore. I had grown up with this guy, watching this guy, but he was very old at this point and just didn't have that presence anymore. So just being a kid that didn't know too much, I sent a tape down to Los Angeles, and the man that eventually hired me, Dennis Swanson, he's the same guy that a few years later hired Oprah and got her started. So that's my claim to fame.
He knows talent when he sees it. Is that right?
I guess so.
So you were a weatherman there and then moved on to some other gigs. How did you end up at CNN?
Well, one thing led to another. It was an opportunity. I was in Los Angeles, number two market in the country. And it's like, why did you leave, Steve? Why did you leave? You had it made there. And eventually, once you became a little bit older, you could be the number one position, perhaps. But it was an opportunity to work with the best meteorologist in the country at a new startup called the Weather Channel. And this is in 1982 in Atlanta. So I thought, if I could work with 50 different meteorologists and present the weather as a West Coast representative, this is what I had to do. So I went to CNN after that, but initially it was the Weather Channel in 82. And then CNN's also located there in Atlanta. So I went with them, another startup. But it was quite experience. So from there, one thing led to another. And eventually I finished up my career at CNN and wanted to do something different, like Ron Howard, perhaps go behind the scenes as opposed to in front of the camera.
And that's what you're doing today.
I am. When I left CNN in 1993, I started a video production business called The Video Editor, which is still going today. We produce corporate videos and training videos, things along that line. But then once my clients found out that I used to be on television, they'd say, hey, I have an opportunity to give us great talk, or I need to present this big sales pitch. Can you help me? Give me some pointers. So that led me to start Media Training Network way back in 1998. And I've been doing that ever since.
And so tell us a little bit about that. What are we going to hear from you today about the Media Training Network that some of our listeners can pull some of these insights away from and become better, presenters, better storytellers on stage?
Yeah. As most people, of course, will never go on television, but I'd like to be able to at least give you some tips and pointers in case you do. Matter of fact, one of my clients is in the financial services industry, and he was asked to go on CNBC's Fast Money program. And he did, went to New York, got 4 minutes worth of exposure for himself and for his firm. And I mean, that's kind of publicity you can't buy. But he was just being an expert guest, giving his opinion. So I had an opportunity to train him beforehand, before the audition, and then afterwards, before he went back on camera. He's gone twice now to New York, and he has a standing invitation to do that. But later in the program, Park, if it's all right with you, I'd like to give you some inside information on what it's like to give a print interview and then a radio interview, and then what's the difference between those and a TV interview.
Okay. Well, I tell you what, I am going to turn the reins of the Business of Story show over to you. This will be your coaching session for the next few minutes or several minutes. And so where do we start? What do you recommend?
Well, and the reason I say let's talk about the media here, the print and radio and also television, because it gives you a good base on how to get yourself ready for any kind of presentation. Now, when you're talking on a media situation like this that we're talking about, you really have to up your game. You have to be your best self possible. And so that's why I say, let's start with this and then see how you do. I'll give you some coaching as we go along and then turn it back to you. But first of all,
put me into the crucible. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, no. Hey, you're the host. I'm not gonna rip you apart too badly. No.
No. I appreciate it. I mean, that's why we do this stuff. So hopefully our listeners can pull away some great content here.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. And that's what I tell when my clients come in for coaching at Media Training Network. I tell them, listen, you came to me for a specific reason. You want to improve in a certain area, and that's great. And if I'm here and if I'm your friend, that's great. If I'm not your friend, that's also great. But my job is to help you to get further along in your communication style and to kill it when you're on stage, or do the best interview you possibly can. So it's important. All right.
Yep, here we go.
Park, if you're ready, it's print interview time. So let me give you just a kind of a few things to keep in mind, and then we'll do an interview right after this, and then we'll jump into radio and TV after that. But a print interview, that's a newspaper or magazine, you need to be prepared ahead of time. Read the articles by the reporter to get a sense of, the writing style. What's the personality like? Know ahead of time what topics or areas or questions that may come from you. I was interviewed one time on the phone by Investor's Business Daily newspaper about my media training skills. And I had all my notes pasted on the wall in front of me. So I was totally prepared. And so you couldn't hear my papers rustling and things like that. So that's a quick way. And I have it, matter of fact, on this podcast, I have my notes spread out in front of me so I can quickly go to this point or that point. I know it ahead of time, but it helps to have some presence in front of me. The reporter will ask questions and then you will answer. And you will hear them possibly typing your answer up. So you can answer a little bit slower as they are typing away, but don't get into the pattern of over talking. You don't want to keep telling more and more and more information. They're asking you a specific question, so you need to answer that question. And you have a little more time because it is print. All right, here we go, Park. Hey, thanks, Park. I'm writing an article about how businesses communicate to their employees and also to their customers. I checked out your website and I watched some of your videos and I have some questions for you. Is that all right?
You bet, Steve. Let's go for it.
All right. It seems that the newest trend in business and marketing is storytelling. Is that true? And why is it effective?
It's funny, Steve, because the best leaders have always been great storytellers. So I don't know if it's as much of a trend in doing it or a trend in consciousness. People are just finally realizing the primal power of story because that's how we human beings prefer to take in information, to create meaning out of the madness of being human beings in a basic story form of setup, problem, resolution.
Well, speaking of a problem and resolution, I happened to call your chief competitor, and he told me that your company is only interested in coaching government agencies and not corporate America. Is that true?
No, it's not. I, have the absolute privilege of working with the U.S. Air Force, from their brigadier to four-star generals out in Washington, D.C. twice a year, and it's one of the great honors of my life. But it's only a very small portion of my business. I work with Fortune 500 companies right down to individual leaders that are trying to get their brand story focused so that they can have a greater impact in their career.
Very good. All right. End of conversation. End of the interview. Very good. Absolutely wonderful. You see that I tried to trip you up here a little bit. Now, this may or may not happen, but I wanted to be prepared, give you some conflict or some drama here where I said, I called your chief competitor and he told me this or that, because it's a reporter's job to create some drama sometimes, or to get you to say something that maybe is off color or off topic, or causes some doubt or credibility issues somewhere else, and that makes for a good story. So I'm glad that you didn't get sucked into that or buy into that.
And do they do that, Steve, because they are looking for that conflict or the contradiction? Because, as you said, it makes a great story.
Exactly. It will sell more newspapers or magazines. So it's they will ask questions like that. Not necessarily, not all of them. When I did the Investors Business Daily interview, they did not ask any questions like that. But always be prepared. I teach my clients to be prepared for something like that. And so if, for instance, it was true, or oh, I know who you talked to, let me tell you about those guys.
Right.
Again, they're just fishing. They don't know. And that's another good point, Park, is that most of these people that will interview you in a newspaper or a print or elsewhere, actually, they probably have no idea of the subject matter. They don't, they're just thrown an assignment this day. Hey, go interview Park on Business of Story and so forth, go with it. And they don't know Jack from Jane. So they want some information from you, and print reporters will be at maybe say, give me a little background on this. But the trick is not to give them too much information, because the reporter later on, when he's looking back on his notes, can get a little confused and perhaps misquote you. So you don't want that to happen. So give some information, but don't overwhelm them with too much. With print, you can expect maybe a 2 to 4 week turnaround time. So just keep that in mind. It's not going to be in the newspaper tomorrow. And
how prepped do you want to be going into that, to know what the slant is, or that where you want to take the story? Now, a good writer won't always let you do that, but when you were getting prepared, are you saying, all right, Park, now I want you to really make sure that you're getting this point across, a theme, if you will, for the interview?
Always being prepared. I always say you can never be over prepared. You just need to have your information down as best as you possibly can. And yes, that interview may go in many different directions, but at least you're prepared for it. But I also will note that you have a reason for being interviewed. What's your agenda? Yeah, the newspaper recognizes you as an authority, but why do you even want to talk to these people? Well, maybe you want the exposure. Maybe you want the publicity or the notoriety that goes along with that. But you also want to bring something to the table, either a call to action at the end of it, which we'll do when it's radio or TV time, and we'll explain that later. But you want to get your points across. You want to make sure that, if it's, you want to be known as the expert authority, that somehow you bring those points out. Or if there's a point that's maybe topical currently that's in the news, you could bring mention of that and then give your opinion on that. So it makes you topical, and you're giving great information to the readers or the listeners. So yes, you should be prepared as best as you possibly can.
Now, one of the challenges I have, and it's not like I get interviewed a lot, but even with podcasts and so forth, of that over talking. As you get going, it becomes the curse of the expert, and you just go blah, 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 blah. How do you coach your people to not do that? How can we kind of rein that in so we get our most salient points out there as crisply as possible?
Through preparation, and then experience of actually doing it off and on, again and again and again. By preparation, I mean, if you're talking about your business, you may have lots and lots of information. You probably have a book that you could write or have written about what your topic is.
In the throes of that right now, as a matter of fact, hopefully be published early next year.
Cool. Very good. Looking forward to that. So anyway, you have all this information, but when you're in the media, you have to keep it to the point. Get to the point. Matter of fact, that was one of the things that we were taught in broadcasting, not forcibly taught, but just kind of inherent. Keep it short, get to the point, and always ask or think what's in it for the audience. Why do they care? Why do they want to hear your story? Why do they want to hear your information? So make it relatable to the audience. And that's one thing to do when you're in a newspaper situation or any of the media, actually. Find out who the audience is, who listens to this podcast, who listens to the radio, the television program you're going to be on, or who reads the magazine in the print media. Is it a business-oriented publication, or are they females or males or a mix? What is it? So the better you know your audience, their audience, then you can communicate and talk to them in the language that they understand.
Now, that seems like it would be kind of a no-brainer concept, but I would imagine, to be that prepared going in, but I would imagine you come across a lot of corporate folk that don't think that far into it. They think they can just show up and be on.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest mistakes that I hear people talk about, is that, hey, I went to business school, or I did this, I did that. I know what I'm talking about. I know my subject matter. I'll just wing it. It doesn't work that way. When they do wing it, they blow it because they're rambling. They're not on task. You bore the audience, and you've lost them already. And you're talking about generally yourself. Look how good I am. I do this. I can do that. Or our company does this and that. It's what's in it for the audience. Again, if you think that way, you're going to be able to serve them more effectively.
Absolutely. All
right. Radio is next. Now, radio is also very similar to the electronic media of podcast. Podcasts are generally longer form, so you're going to have a little more exchange of information back and forth. There's usually not too many commercial interruptions or other people talking in. There may be some questions from the audience. Maybe they phone in. So that's possible on a radio. It's quicker paced Q&A. Keep your answers shorter than you would if on a print situation. And try to make your sound bites memorable. And what do I mean by a sound bite? Short, sweet, to the point, crisp, something memorable if you can. Listen ahead of time to the radio program. Learn the personality of the host, if they're fun or more serious, who their audience is, young, old, and try to have something fun for them to participate in, like we're doing right here, kind of a train park kind of situation here. Maybe you give them some true or false questions about your topic and have the radio host ask questions about it or answer them yes or no, and say, no, that's not quite right. It's actually this, and here's why. So you've got a little bit of fun going on there, but you're also still giving some teaching. And if you can, know ahead of time how long the segment's going to go. As I said, radio is generally pretty short, to the point. And the morning radio is much quicker paced. And sometimes there's co-hosts and different people that will chime in and cut in and laugh and have a good time. But generally just go with, know what the audience is all about, what the radio station is, and then go with it. All
And
right.
do you recommend actually writing out some of your sound bites? Like you have your notes up on the wall. Do you actually ever write out those bites and have them at the
Yes.
ready?
Yeah, the most important points that you want to get across, I say come up with 10 different points you want to get across and come up with a pretty good answer for each of those. And then from those 10, come up with 3 sound bites that you want to talk about. And we'll get into sound bites a little bit later on. And there's 10 or more different formats on how to craft a sound bite. There is a lot of what do you call it? The bewitchery about
The applied
media
science
sound bites?
and bewitchery of storytelling. Yeah, the
See?
sound bite to hook you.
You can tell I listened to your show before.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, you bet. So that's an important part of it. So, all right, we're going to get into the radio station here. And
Okay.
typically you would call in like we do with a podcast. You would call in somewhere, the radio station. They check the levels ahead of time, your voice levels, and make sure the microphone's working and all that. And we've done that, and just a kind of a quick setup, and then we're good to go. All right, so 93 KHJ Los Angeles. Hi, it's me, Steve Kosch. You've heard me say before that I started my TV career at the age of 15 and worked my way up to ABC and CNN. But today we're going to hear from someone else, their story, and his name is Park Howell of Business of Story. Park, is storytelling in business something new, and why do we do it? Why do companies do that?
Well, it's not something new. It's been around for an awful long time. And Steve, thank you, by the way, for having me on your show. How's the weather out there today, by the way? Is it looking pretty good?
The weather is awesome. It's Southern California. It's great 300 plus days a year.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yep, story in business has fascinated me for the longest of time, and I didn't even realize it. I've been in the branding world for about 35 years. And I had got a degree in music composition and theory, so I was always studying the structure of creativity and at least story through music, not realizing how well it would serve me in my later career. And now I find that story is the most underutilized but powerful business asset any leader can use, because it has a way of hacking through the noisy world out there and hooking the hearts of their audiences. And you think about it, Steve, you get right down to it, everything we ever buy, we buy with our hearts, and then we justify that purchase with our heads. So why not use an emotional story to hook them?
Okay, so by story, are you talking taglines and slogans or an actual story?
Tagline or a slogan is simply, a headline, something, it's the movie poster that gets you into the story, that captures that overall brand narrative in a very short, sharp way. But you have to have a brand narrative to begin with. What does your company stand for? What do you stand for, and how is it reflected through that brand? And how do you tell that story in varying ways on different media, depending on who you're talking to?
Perfect. Well, that's all the time we have today. Park, tell the audience quickly where they can find out more about the business of story.
Well, you can meet me over at businessofstory.com, where I will share with you the applied science and bewitchery of storytelling to help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell.
Perfect. All right. Interview over. Howdy do, audience. Yeah, perfect. Now, you started with, after I introduced you, you started with that relatability factor. We talked about you asked me about the weather here where I was. So that's good. You're showing your personality there. And then we asked the serious question, and you go in and answer it very well. You gave your answers very memorably. You gave some examples on how that works. You gave some history that it showed that it's not something new and trendy. It's been around for a long time. And you just had some very great information when you talked about that. So good job there.
Well, thank you.
And then the call to action, that's important too, because that's one of the reasons you're on the radio station or the podcast, is to get your name, amplified. And as you say, amplify the impact and simplify their lives, right?
And often in the interviews, do you find that your students, the people in the interview, have a hard time with that CTA, that call to action, because I feel like, no, they're just there to impart their wisdom and that their audiences will naturally connect the dots and not have a call to action, that you have to really coach that out of them?
No, you're absolutely right. They hesitate. They feel they're the guest, and they don't want to take the, they don't want to grab the microphone, so to speak, and say, "Here's what I'm about, or what we can do, how we can help." But if you go in with that attitude of helping people, I think it will just come naturally. Hey, listen, if we talked a lot about media training today. If you want to go further with me, check me out on my website, mediatrainingnetwork.com, things like that. And it should just naturally happen. But you're right, people need to be coached in doing that. Then there are a few people that will take advantage of the whole situation and become too commercial. Then throughout the whole interview, it's all about them and their company, and they did this and they did that. And it turns the audience off because they're listening not to hear a 60-minute commercial. They're there to get some information. They listen to the topic title and they want to go learn more about that. And that's what you're doing. So don't give them tons of commercials. Webinars are a big thing now too, where they do give some training, but then they subtly drop some hints occasionally. Hey, if you want to go further with me on this, at the end of the program, we'll give you some more information on how you can take it to the next level, or have a free consultation with me. So things like that. When you're on the radio, more so than the newspaper, the print, you have to only use your voice to get your message across. So your voice becomes much more important to make your points. You need vocal variety. You're on the, your voice has that inflection to it. You don't want to speak in a monotone voice, but before long, people will fall asleep and you'll just drone on. So the pacing, the tonality of your voice are extremely important when you're obviously on radio or a podcast.
I had the good fortune of interviewing Robert Siegel, the famous broadcaster from NPR, all things considered, about a year and a half ago. And in that interview, he talked about the power of silence. So when you're talking about pacing, I guess it comes down to go ahead and let your audience's ears breathe. I mean, you don't have to do a run on it. And I find that's really hard to do too, but you've got to find that pacing, those quiet moments to help your points really sink in.
It does. And notice I gave it a pause there at the end of your question and so forth. People do not like talking over. And, some of the TV shows that are on during the midday, the people just talk on top of each other, and most people can't stand that. But yes, pausing is you can pause for a dramatic effect, or you could pause just to soak in what was asked of you and then to proceed, and not to feel that rushedness that we do find. So you're absolutely right. That does take some practice on just being quiet for a moment. And it seems like it's an eternity, but it's actually just maybe a second or so. It's no big deal at all.
Isn't that interesting? Now, when you are preparing someone for an interview, do you also coach them in the way of getting in a mindfulness state, or taking deep breaths, or trying to get that anxiety, heart rate down a little bit so that they aren't racing through it?
Right. Yeah, that's very important. That's for instance, on radio, or before this podcast went on, I used my voice quite a bit. I would enunciate words just loudly and over exaggerate them just so I could warm up my voice. I don't want any cold water or any hot water. I want room temperature water just to wet my whistle. But just to be prepared vocally for performing. That's what I'm doing. I'm giving information, hopefully in an interesting way that's not boring or anything else. It's just giving them the information. So yes. And how do you calm your nerves? Deep breathing will help. Just deep breathing in and then breathing out. Standing up on a podcast or a radio allows your whole midriff here, your middle section of your diaphragmic breathing to extend fully. If you're sitting down or crunched over a computer or something along those lines, you won't have that vocal variety. So those are some things, yes, just to calm the nerves and realize this is important. And I'm sure most of your audience can relate to this. You're on stage or you're on television and a lot of people are watching you. Don't think about that. Focus in when we do television next. You're focusing in on that host or that reporter. You're giving them the information that they are looking for. And in turn, your audience will as well. So I think it's a mindset basically that you are there as an expert guest. They wanted you there. So you are there to give your opinion and your training. And once you go in with that mindset, you'll be fine. I remember actually recently coaching some high level financial folks. They came in actually and said, one person came in, I've got 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes, and I want to do it 3 times, and that's it. Just very type A personality. And oh my gosh, I felt, and then when I started the training, the individual would say, nodded like he knew this already. Oh no. But then I calmly realized that I had some experience here. I had the credibility. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone with me or paid me the big money. So just relax and give them the information, the training. Well, I found out that was just posturing. They wanted to come in, steamroll me through and let them know that they're in charge and I'm not, sort of thing. But once we, got to a certain level here, we realized that we were both there for a reason, and let's make it work together. And it does. So again, it's knowing your stuff, but having that confidence that you are there for a purpose and a reason.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, that attitude of helping people. It seems
Exactly.
like once you put that cap on, and I've recognized that on the stage too, if I'm really super nervous going up for whatever reason, and you always get, the nerves going, it's typically because my ego is taken over and I'm thinking it's all about me. And once I stop and shift that over to my audience and say, no, I'm actually here, even if I fall off the front of the stage, I'm here in service to my audience. And it seems like it really helps quell those fears, those nerves. And you also take on a whole different approach to your presentation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And if you're prepared, that's the key. Then you know your information, it's there, and then you can move forward. Even if you forget something in a speech, for instance, you know that you can transition to the next thing that you do remember. And the audience will never know that you skipped over something. So
exactly.
Yeah, it's being prepared. All right, we're ready for television.
Okay, before we go to television, Steve, I would like to take a quick break for our friends over at Sendable, who are proud sponsors of the Business of Story, and we're so happy to have them here. But when we come back, I want to dive into TV with you and figure out how we can all be better on the big screen. Right after this. Many of you have been following me in the Business of Story on social media for a while now, and I really appreciate it. And if you're not, I hope you will. We share valuable business storytelling tips to help your brand stand out among the awful noise out there. And we do it all thanks to Sendable, a social media management platform that helps over 3,000 digital agencies worldwide to work with their clients, breathe life into their brands, and get their stories heard on social media. What we like about Sendable is they make it super easy to manage your content and your stories online. They allow you to source content from clients and collaborate closely with them to create a social media strategy built on true and proven storytelling principles. You can reliably plan and schedule content to be automatically published to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Pinterest, and more. And you can demonstrate the impact that this content has had on your audience growth and conversion by reaching out through their in-depth reporting and analytics. There's much, much, much more that you can do. But you know what? I think maybe my favorite feature has to be Smart Posts functionality. Now, what Smart Posts are is it makes it incredibly easy to craft social media content and in one single step, customize it for each platform, giving you the best chance of driving engagement and getting people to pay attention to your content. Sendable truly makes managing so many channels an absolute breeze. I know, you have a lot of choices when it comes to social media management apps, so I wanted to let you know we here at the Business of Story can't recommend Sendable enough. Gavin and his team are so great that they have a special offer just for you. You can now get, as a special offer for Business of Story listeners, Sendable's Traction Plan for only $69 a month. That's a 30% savings. So sign up now at sendable.com/Park30. Believe me, your stories will take off. Welcome back to the Business of Story. Park Howell here with Steve Kosch of MediaTrainingNetwork.com. I hope you're having as much fun out there as I am. This is great. I am learning so much today. So we've talked about print. We've talked about interviews on radio. Now we're going to dive into interviewing on TV.
And the reason we're doing this, again, as a refresher, that once you've figured out how to do print interviews and radio and podcast interviews and television interviews, everything else you do presentation-wise will come so much easier. Starts with preparation, starts with mindset, knowing your material, and just moving forward in it. And having what I call executive presence, and I'd like to get into that a little bit later on, that's beyond the basics of just actually how do you stand up, how do you present, how do you talk. But it's that nonverbal clues that the audience is sensing. So we'll get into that a little bit later on. But right now you are on television, Park, and you will be looked at. And usually the segments on television are shorter in length. You must give the viewers some great content and value, or takeaways, if you will. And again, the same principle with radio. You want to, if you can, make it interactive, depending on the program. If there's a give and a take, maybe something fun, depends on the audience, of course. But give your information and make it as entertaining as possible, because it is an entertaining mode of media that you're on.
But let me ask you real quick, being entertaining as possible, quite often that interview is just going to be a headshot, right? You're there being interviewed. So it's not like you're being entertaining necessarily physically, I suppose. It's just more on how you are sharing your stories and your sound bites.
And depending on the segment, if you're, let's say, going on Good Morning America, if you've watched Good Morning America or the Today Show or any of those, it's all about they're promoting a book, or there's some new way of some new widget or whatever it might be. You notice that they want to get the anchors, the hosts, involved with the story as much as possible to make it entertaining or a little more interactive instead of just a talking head. So another thing with television, you can bring in, once you've been booked to be on a television program, and start small. A lot of people think they want to get on the Today Show right away. Yeah, I would too, but I haven't been there yet. But you have to start small. And a lot of the smaller TV markets around the country will be more than happy to talk about whatever your topic is. You don't even have to have a book or anything else. You are the expert in your topic, and then make it interesting when you pitch it to the producer or the reporter, mostly the producers. Try to make it interesting. Does it look like it's going to be a visual type story? Are you wearing a new coat that just invented and you can put your phone in it and you can have easy access to it, or something that is visually interesting or exciting? So keep that in mind. All right. In the studio, only maintain eye contact with the host. A lot of people might get there and they're looking around. They see all the cameras and they're looking at the people walking around behind the scenes. I advise just look at the host, the reporter, lean slightly into them. That gives the visual representation that you're engaging with that host or that anchor, that you're interested in your material. And then be more animated than you normally are. Be bigger. Even when you go on stage, you can't just say, "Hi, I'm Steve Kosch, and this is my story." Be a little more excited and, "Hi, I'm Steve Kosch. Great to be here today. Here's what I'm going to help you do." That sort of thing. A little more bigger, more energy, more enthusiasm. So with that set up, are you ready, Park?
I am. Let's go on TV.
All right. 3, 2, 1. Hi, I'm Steve Kosch. Our topic today is business communication. And my guest knows a thing or two about that. Park Howell from Business of Story.
Steve, thanks for having me here.
Very good. First of all, Park, you're the first person I've ever known that has the name Park. Is that short for Parker?
No, actually, we have a son named Parker. So he got the ER, so he didn't have to be a junior. But no, mine came from a fascinating place. My dad was a civil engineer, and his very first job was working for a gentleman by the name of Park Thorgeson, the head city engineer in Fargo, North Dakota. And about the time I was born, he passed away, and I asked my dad why he gave me his name. Now, remember, I'm one of 7 kids: Dan, Melody, Tom, Steve, Chris, Mike, and Park. So I stood out a little bit. I had a unique brand in the Howell household. But I asked him, I said, "Why did you give me his name?" And he said, well, he was my mentor. He was my first employer as a civil engineer, and he always got things done happily and easily. There you have it.
And that's a story behind the story. All
That's
right,
the
very
story
good.
behind the story.
What is it that your company does, Park?
Well, we help leaders of purpose-driven brands do a better job of connecting with people and actually moving them to action through the use of proven story frameworks. I really coach on three, one called the and button, therefore, a second one that is the 5 primal elements of story, a small story for a big impact. And then I have a larger narrative structure I use for presentations. And if you would allow me, Steve, I'd like to put you through one of those. And that
All
would be
right.
the and button, therefore.
All right, very good. I'm ready.
So what I want you to do is if you've got something on your mind right now, an issue at play, or maybe you've got a story coming up after this, I want you to set it up in the 3-act structure of and, button, therefore. You do that by setting the scene and raising the stakes, but introducing the conflict. Therefore, here's where you're going to search for the solution. For example, I've seen in my world that most executives communicate and care, but bore. Therefore, use the primal elements of story to hack through the noise and hook the hearts of your audiences to move them to action. And button, therefore, it's perfect 3-act structure in a very short, soundbitey way. So can you give that a go?
Can I give that a go?
Yes. You got something on your mind? Set the scene and raise the stakes, but introduce the conflict. Therefore, tell us about the solution.
All right, that's a little too much for me right now. Why don't you you give me your example?
Well, I just having gone through that, it was very simple. So for my own life, for how Business of Story came around. So my first contextual statement is I've been in the branding arts for 35 years, and I've helped many, many companies grow through the influence of mass media. But technology has changed all that, handing the masses the media. Therefore, to actually connect, we need to use the primal power of story to cut through the techno noise and to be heard in this day and age.
Okay, all right. Now, you talked about purpose-driven business. What does that mean?
That means brands that stand for something more than just selling you something. And I think one of my favorites is Patagonia. They do a beautiful job of saying, don't buy our stuff unless you absolutely have to have it. Or if you have some and it's in disrepair, we will replace it or get it fixed. Their thing is do less harm, make less impact on the planet, while they're actually, their purpose is to outfit you in the gear you need to survive out there, but without the major impact on the planet. That's a good example of a purpose-driven brand in my mind.
As we wrap up here, give the viewers your best business storytelling advice. How do they begin something like this?
Know your audience. Sit down, think about who they are, what they want, what they care for, and how you can absolutely help them get that. And in doing so, you have to first understand and have empathy for their journey and their story, so you know which story of yours to share with them, to connect those two worlds together. It all starts with empathy. Every story does, and that starts by understanding your audience in a godlike way.
Very interesting. Very great. All right, we're off air. Thank you. So isn't it interesting that your business is also driven by the audience? What's in it for them? What's the benefit? So it's just like our media training here.
Yep.
Get the information out there. All right. And then you did really well. The only thing I would say on this one, you were a little more jargon was used that I didn't understand as a generalist. Some of the purpose-driven business, I didn't know really what that meant. Contextually, those kind of words were maybe a little above what should be used. You want your message to be understood very clearly and succinctly. And if that means, I won't say dumb down the words, but make it more simple. There's always a simpler way to say something. And, really, and use a bigger word like that. Maybe it works in academia, but to the regular audience, just give them the simple word. So just, think of that. And I know too, I've thrown you right into 3 different medias here, and you've done an extremely well job, a very good job. And that's the reason I did that, because I knew you'd do well. And we did not rehearse this, audience.
No,
But he did really well.
Thank you. And I guess to really simplify it is I help people excel through the stories they tell.
Very good. See, that's a nice little soundbite right there that really sums it all up.
And you have
Perfect.
some alliteration in there. And is
Yeah.
that cool? It doesn't sound too salesy to a
Yeah.
reporter.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
No, be careful that it doesn't sound too corny, but what you just said was fine because it kind of summed up everything that you were talking about there. And then after you've been on the media or any media appearance, make sure you share the links on your website and social media and let your story and your influence be spread that way. So, how to prepare yourself for all this? I remember when I was rehearsing to be on television, I would go in front of some big mirrors and just practice talking and telling the story of what happened that day and what should happen tomorrow, giving my best ad lib ability, a good go there to tell that story. But I saw when I was looking in the mirror, I saw how my hands were, my face was, my reactions, my gestures, all those things were important. And I would challenge your audience, Park, to grab their smartphone and record themselves maybe once or twice a week and just let them talk about their business or what they do and find out if they're using crutches in their words, for instance, too many ums and ahs and and things like that. Once you're aware of situations like that, you'll be better prepared to know to cut back on those use of those words. And there's nothing wrong with words such as we've talked about. I know, right? That's one word that's being overused too much. And that's the problem. Some of these phrases are, topical right now. A lot of people are using these words, but it's the overuse of these words that gets us in trouble. So I would challenge your listeners to record themselves with their phone and be aware of their speaking and their mannerisms and start making some changes because that will help you to get that executive presence that I'd like to talk about.
Well, in that word right, isn't it like a speed
Right.
bump? When I hear that, it's just
Yeah.
right. It's just like, oh man, body blow, speed bump to the conversation we're trying to have. And it's so hard because I guess it just gets embedded in people's brains. They hear it so much, they don't even realize that they're using it like they're using it.
I call them crutch words or filler words. You're right. I just found.
You're correct.
Yes, correct. There was a media interview that I saw online of one of my baseball players for the Atlanta Braves. And I'm just, I'm watching, I'm interested. And I kept hearing this phrase come up. You know, you know, you know. I said, oh my gosh, I got to count this. It was about a 6-minute video interview. And he said it 40 times. 40 times. And it's a crutch phrase. It's something we're not even aware of. But if you're on camera with your smartphone, you'll realize that you say that a little too much. And it gives us, it's almost like a pause, like, let me think about this for a second. I'll just say, right. Okay, now I'm ready for the next question or whatever it might be. Or I know, so be aware of your presence. So that's what I'm talking about here.
How do you shake those crutches? It's hard, I guess, if you're not aware that you're even doing it. So yes, you do the video phone and you see it there, but I'm sure it's not that easy just to dispel them. How do you get people over that?
Yeah, there's many ways, and you can Google it and find it easily enough. I went into Toastmasters after having been on television for so long. I just thought, this will be fun. I'll give some speeches and things like that. I went into Toastmasters, and they have little crickets, if you will, that people will push if you use a crutch word, a filler word. And my gosh, I'm giving my speech and I'm hearing these crickets going off, and I'm very much aware of what I'm saying and realized that I was using those crutch words way too much. I would videotape myself, so that was another way to do that. Just being aware of what you're saying is much more important. If you are pointed out that you say the same word all the time or quite often, once you're aware of that, when you're ready to speak, you realize that maybe I shouldn't use that word. It's just awareness, and that's really what it is. But there are many ways to go about doing that, so you eliminate those crutch words from your vocabulary.
So we're going to talk about executive presence. Before we do that, can you share with us some of the companies, people you work with? And I imagine some of them you can't, but what size organizations are you working with out there and training their people?
Generally, more the larger size companies that have multiple departments and so forth, different levels, but generally it's director to CEO level. But it can be just an individual, like for instance, my financial guy. He's CEO and portfolio manager for a firm here in Newport Beach, California, where I'm located, and he had this opportunity to go on television. So he, obviously a lot of responsibility managing, $1.5 billion worth of cash, but a smaller individual. But their companies, director to CEO would be the best fit. And we've touched all areas, all industries, including politics, for instance, including the 2016 presidential candidate, and then others. So it runs the gamut. Everybody needs to know how to speak and act accordingly. And that executive presence, which is the next thing that we're moving into, that's kind of more of a mindset. To have the mindset of a CEO, somebody that has a lot of responsibility and is always on stage. And I always say that we are all on stage. Doesn't mean they have to go on stage to speak or on television or on camera. Everybody is watching them. They are always on stage. And how to have that executive presence, it's a lot of things. It's the verbal, what you say. And most leaders that I've been around that are at the high levels, they speak in sentences as opposed to paragraphs. They cut to the chase. They get their point, get it across very quickly, and they move on. They hold themselves in a proper manner. They're not totally dogmatic about things. They're more interested in what people have to say. And again, they'll slightly lean into them and engage in active listening, not just listening and then ready for you to cut in with your next little statement you were going to say anyway. They need to be engaged and listen proactively. So those are some of the things. And then nonverbal is the body language. I can't say enough about that. As a matter of fact, it's been said that the body language and how we say what we say is like 75 or 80% of the communication message that gets out there. Only a small percentage is the actual words that we use. It's important to know what you're going to say, but it's more important to say it correctly and then have your non-verbal body language be congruent with that message. For instance, if I said something along the lines of, our company is totally dedicated and transparent, and we serve our clients and our employees. But if I said that with my arms closed and a distant stare and didn't look sincere, the human being, when they see this, they're going to believe more the nonverbal than they will the words that come out of their mouth. So those are some things that to be very careful with. And we really get into it. Once a client knows their presentation, their material, then we work on that finer points. Even walking into a room to give a presentation, you need to have that executive presence. That's that magnetic ability that everybody wants to be around that individual. That's what I help my CEOs and executives to attain to.
So does the Superman pose really help people with their confidence? You hear that if you're backstage and you strike the Superman pose for a little bit, 30 seconds or whatever, that people have said it actually swells them with strength and confidence to take that stage. Does something like that really work?
I wouldn't go with that technique because, again, it's a kind of a closed off, I'm more superior than you are. And of course, you won't show that on stage, but
Right.
I think that sets your mind up as you being superior to them. No, you want to come in as a servant, somebody that can give the information and serve that audience well. If you make some business from it later on, great, but you're there to serve your audience. So I think if you go in with that mindset, go in with that confidence that, hey, I'm here for a reason. I know my stuff, and now just let me share it, along with some other tips. But I think that's a good way to go about presenting beforehand,
Are,
getting ready for it.
are there two or three absolute no-nos with body language that you see happen often and you have to remind people not to do?
Nervous tics, people that don't even know that they have this. When I was on CNN, I interviewed someone, and every time I'd ask a question, they would give the answer, and then they'd go, little nervous tick that they didn't know. Fortunately, it was on tape and we could cut those out. And I think I found one soundbite out of it that we used for the story. But nervous ticks, things like that, brushing their nose or getting the hair out of their eyes all the time. You don't want to wear anything that's distracting on your body that could take away from your message. So those are things that once you make people aware of it, that they'll learn from that and then they'll move on from that. So just being aware.
Is there any truth to that idea that if somebody is stating an opinion, an assertion, and touches their face, that they don't actually believe it?
I don't know.
Was that an old wives' tale?
It may be. I've talked to an FBI special agent and asked about body language because that is a part of their interpretation during an interview presentation with a suspect. They'll look at the body language. They'll listen to what's being said. They'll see if it's congruent. They will also tell you that folded arms doesn't mean they're standoffish or anything like that. Just by itself could be that they're cold or they're giving themselves a self hug. Lots of reasons why they could be folding their arms. And they will tell you that a lot of these suspects are very good poker players, and they'll look you directly in the eye and say, no, I didn't do it. So bottom line, or what the result was from this is, don't read too much just the body language into a communication. It should be a part of the communication.
And then finally, Steve, a question for you is, when do you coach someone to insert a longer form story into something to make their point? So we've talked about sound bites, getting to the point, speaking in sentences, be clear, keep moving forward. But I've often found that there's nothing more powerful than a little anecdote that may take you, a minute to 90 seconds to make that point.
It is tough. It's more challenging that way, especially at the higher levels of the media. You wouldn't be able to do that necessarily on the Today Show or Good Morning America, or even a local television station in Los Angeles or New York or Phoenix or wherever it might be. It depends on the situation, the application. If they're doing a longer form program on the study of stories being used in business, and it's a 10-minute or a 30-minute documentary or whatever, then sure, great. But to squeeze that in, I always tell my clients, you've got to make it short and sweet, get to the point. So, take something that you think takes 30 seconds or a minute. I bet you can get that down to quite a few less words and be able to deliver that probably in maybe 15 seconds. Yeah. So it will take some work, but it will work.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. Are there any final parting tips that you would like to share with our listeners?
The only thing we didn't mention too much on it, and that is the sound bites. I mentioned there's probably 10 different ways to go about a sound bite, but I advocate with my clients to bring their message down short, maybe make it 30 seconds. Then I say, let's find 3 sound bites that are the best, get it down to 10, 15 seconds at best. And then try using different types of formats of sound bites to get your message across. And some of the other formats are metaphors or emotional or humor or rhetorical questions, superlatives, maybe pop culture to make it more relatable. Maybe a celebrity is using your widget or your service or something along those lines. You can name drop. So those are some ways. Just try your sound bites on in those different forms of communication, which is, challenging to get your soundbite across with the most information to be the most helpful in the shortest amount of time.
And I suppose have some fun and be entertaining while you do it, as long as that's appropriate to the content you're being interviewed on.
Correct. Yeah. And be yourself, but also be bigger than yourself, meaning you do have to be more on than you normally are. But media trainers do not come in and change somebody totally. I'm not a Frankenstein. I don't assemble Frankensteins. I just work with what you've got as a personality. I just fine tune your presentation to make sure that it's the absolute best.
So great to have you here, Steve. I appreciate the time, and I really appreciate the tips. I'm going to put them to use. And thanks for coming by the show today.
And I look forward to reading your book soon.
I'll send you a copy, I promise.
Perfect.
Thank you all for listening to this edition of The Business of Story. If you like what you heard here and you've got some folks in your firm or some people you know that are going to be giving interviews or even taking the stage somewhere, by all means, share this episode with them. You may be a total lifesaver with just a few of the tips that they can pull out of this. So share it around your world. And if you like what you're hearing as well, visit me over at iTunes and leave a rating and review, because that certainly helps us expand our world. And I appreciate that greatly. And if I can be of service to you, you know where to find me, businessofstory.com, where we have tools, tips, talent, techniques, just waiting for you to help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell. And as you start telling those stories, head over to my friends at Sendable. They've got that special promotion going for you right now as a sponsor of Business of Story. Just go to sendable.com/Heart30 and you will get 30% off of their traction plan right now. Thanks, folks at Sendable, for being a sponsor here. And thank you all for listening to this edition. Until next week, when we will have another amazing story artist on here like Steve, remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks for listening.